The youngest person to ever be executed was 14-year-old George Stinney, Jr. in 1944. George Stinney, a black boy, was accused of murdering 2 white people. His all-white jury deliberated for just 10 minutes before finding him guilty and sentencing him to death. 70 years later, he was exonerated of the crimes that he was killed for. And again, in 2014, we see another unjust killing of a young black boy. Within 3 seconds of police interacting with 12-year-old Tamir Rice, he was shot and killed by law enforcement for holding a toy gun. Now, both of these events may have been affected by adultification bias. And biases are essentially our brain's way of creating shortcuts to help us understand this really complex world that we live in. So this bias specifically makes us view black and brown boys as more criminal, more responsible for their actions, more mature, and we actually misperceive them as being older than their white counterparts. Now, this is really important in the criminal justice system because we use our biases or shortcuts to help us fill in the blanks that evidence simply can't, such that specifically the adultification bias is attributed to causing longer sentences, higher rates of culpability, and actually charging black kids as adults more frequently than their white counterparts. So one way to reduce this use of biases is to increase elaboration. And elaboration is simply us critically thinking about our choices. So my thesis tests to see that if we increase elaboration, if it will then decrease sentencing disparities. I predict specifically that using stereotype incongruent language child rather than stereotype congruent language juvenile to describe black defendants with weak cases, it will result in lower sentencing differences between them and white children, and also reduce scores of culpability, dangerousness, and sophistication maturity. To test this, participants were shown images of teenagers, either black or white, and we can see that on the left side of my screen how they were paired. This defendant was then paired with a crime, and the crime either had strong or weak evidence, and then the defendant was described as either a child or a juvenile. So if we take, participants then recommended a length of community service hours, as well as rated the defendant on culpability, dangerousness, and sophistication maturity. If we take a look at the big graph in the middle, that gray line on the left shows us that when black defendants with weak cases were described as a child, they received significantly lower rates of community service hours than when they were described as a juvenile. And if we look at the 3 graphs on the side for the related factors, we see a similar trend in that black defendants described as children received much lower rates of culpability, dangerousness, and sophistication maturity. So, all in all, if you happen to be a lawyer and you're representing a black teenager, increasing elaboration can have life-altering effects on their case.